Sometimes the hardest lessons in life come wrapped in the most unexpected packages, and mine came served on a silver platter at an overpriced restaurant in downtown Denver. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how I finally learned that love doesn't mean letting people walk all over you, even when those people share your blood. I'm 34 years old now, and I've built something meaningful with my life, but it took me years to understand that success means nothing if you don't have the self-respect to protect it from those who would exploit it. Growing up in a middle-class family in Colorado, I was always the different one. While my cousins Emma and Tyler spent their weekends at country clubs and shopping malls, I was the girl with her nose buried in books, dreaming of building something bigger than the small world we inhabited. My mother, bless her gentle soul, understood me in ways the rest of the family never did, but she was too kind, too eager to keep the peace to ever stand up for me when the teasing got too harsh. And it did get harsh. Family gatherings were exercises in endurance for me, sitting through endless comparisons and barely veiled insults about my choices, my appearance, my interests. I remember being 12 years old at Thanksgiving, listening to my Aunt Patricia tell everyone at the table how concerned she was about my social development because I preferred reading to parties. Tyler, who was 15 then, had laughed and said I'd probably end up alone with cats, and everyone had chuckled like it was the most harmless joke in the world. My mother had squeezed my hand under the table, but she hadn't said anything. She never did. That was the pattern that would define our family dynamics for years to come. Them mocking, me enduring, my mother silently sympathizing but never intervening. But life has a funny way of turning tables. While Emma spent her college years changing majors every semester, and Tyler bounced from one failed business venture to another funded by his parents, I put my head down and worked. I studied computer science when everyone said it was too hard for a girl. I took unpaid internships while working nights at a call center to pay my bills. I lived in a studio apartment that was barely bigger than Emma's walk-in closet, eating ramen noodles and dreaming of the day when I'd prove them all wrong. The breakthrough came when I was 28. After years of working for other people's dreams, I finally took the leap and started my own software development company. It was just me and two friends from college at first, working out of my garage, surviving on coffee and determination. We had one client, then two, then suddenly we had more work than we could handle. Within 2 years, we had an office, 15 employees, and contracts with some of the biggest names in tech. By 32, I had sold my first company and started another, this time in sustainable technology solutions. Success, I learned, changes how people see you, but it doesn't necessarily change how they treat you. My family's mockery transformed into something else, something that felt even worse in its own way. Now, instead of jokes about my social awkwardness, there were constant requests for loans, investments, and gifts. Emma needed help with her boutique that was hemorrhaging money. Tyler wanted me to invest in his latest surefire scheme. My uncle needed a new car for his real estate business. My aunt thought I should pay for her kitchen renovation as a thank you for all those family dinners she'd hosted over the years. The requests were endless, and they always came wrapped in guilt and manipulation. They'd remind me of all the times they'd included me in family events, conveniently forgetting how miserable they'd made me feel at every single one. They'd talk about family loyalty and helping each other out, though I couldn't remember a single time any of them had helped me when I was struggling. But the worst part was how they acted like my success was somehow communal property, like my hard work and sacrifices had been for their benefit all along. I'd been successfully avoiding most family gatherings for 3 years when my mother called me on a Tuesday evening in October. Her voice was different than usual, softer, almost pleading. "Sarah, honey, I know you're busy, but I need to ask you something. The family is getting together for dinner this Saturday. Everyone will be there. I haven't seen you in so long, and I miss you. Could you please come? Just this once? For me?" I felt my chest tighten. "Mom, you know how these dinners go. I don't think it's a good idea." She sighed, and I could picture her in her kitchen, probably making tea in the delicate china cups she'd inherited from her mother. "I know they can be difficult, sweetheart, but they're still family, and maybe things will be different now. You're successful, established. Maybe they'll treat you with more respect." I wanted to laugh at her naivety, but I couldn't bring myself to crush her hopes. My mother had always been the bridge between me and the rest of the family, the one person who genuinely loved me without conditions or expectations. She'd been looking tired lately, older, and I knew my absence from family events weighed on her. She'd never asked me to pay for anything, never tried to guilt me into giving money to the others, but she did want her family together, dysfunctional as we were. Please, Sarah, just one dinner. If it goes badly, I won't ask again. And that's how I found myself walking into Chez Laurent, Denver's most pretentious French restaurant, on a crisp Saturday evening, wearing my simplest black dress and trying to quiet the anxiety churning in my stomach. I should have known from the choice of restaurant that this wasn't going to be a simple family reunion. Chez Laurent was the kind of place where the appetizers cost more than most people's entire meals, where the wine list was a leather-bound book and the waiters looked at you with barely concealed disdain if you pronounced anything wrong. The family was already there when I arrived, seated at a long table in a private dining room. The conversation stopped when I walked in, and for a moment, everyone just stared. Then, Tyler's face broke into that familiar smirk that had tormented me throughout my childhood. Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence, he said, leaning back in his chair like he owned the place. We were starting to think you'd forgotten you had a family. I forced myself to smile, bending to kiss my mother's cheek before looking for a seat. She squeezed my hand, her eyes bright with happiness at seeing me, and for a moment I felt glad I'd come. Then I tried to sit down. Oh, sorry, Sarah, that seat's taken, Emma said quickly as I reached for the chair next to my mother. She didn't look sorry at all. I moved to another empty chair. That one too, Tyler added, not even bothering to look up from his menu. I looked around the table, counting. There were exactly as many chairs as there were people, minus one. The realization hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my expression neutral. Seriously? I asked, my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest. Tyler finally looked up, his grin widening. This table is for family, Sarah. Real family. The ones who show up for more than just Christmas cards. He gestured vaguely toward the door. I'm sure they have tables in the main dining room. You can join us when we're done if you want. The laughter that rippled around the table wasn't universal. My mother looked mortified, my grandmother seemed confused, and even my younger cousin Amy looked uncomfortable. But the core group, Tyler, Emma, my aunt and uncle, they were all enjoying this moment of petty cruelty. 5 years ago, I would have left. 3 years ago, I would have made a scene. But that night, I did something different. I smiled, a real smile this time, and walked over to a nearby empty table. Dragging a chair from it, I placed it at the corner of the family table, just close enough to be part of the group, but clearly separated. The waiter who approached looked uncertain, but I waved him off and ordered a coffee. Tyler and Emma exchanged glances, but they didn't say anything else. They'd made their point, and I'd made mine. I wasn't going to run away, but I wasn't going to beg for their acceptance either. As the evening progressed, I watched them perform their elaborate dinner theater, and it was like seeing it all for the first time with clear eyes. The orders started immediately. Tyler made a show of studying the wine list before ordering 2 bottles of the most expensive champagne. We're celebrating, after all, he announced, though no one seemed clear on what exactly we were celebrating. Emma ordered the lobster thermidor and the foie gras appetizer, loudly proclaiming that she'd been craving good French food for ages. My uncle ordered practically one of everything from the meat section, claiming he wanted to try it all. My aunt insisted on multiple appetizers for the table, the expensive cheese course, and made sure to mention repeatedly how nice it was to eat somewhere truly upscale for once. I sipped my coffee and watched it all unfold with a strange sense of detachment. They weren't even trying to be subtle about it. Every expensive addition to the order was accompanied by a glance in my direction, a little smirk, a knowing look. They were putting on a show, and I was both the audience and the expected patron. It was fascinating in its transparency, this assumption that I would simply pay for their excess because I could afford to. My mother tried several times to redirect the conversation to normal family topics. She asked Amy about her senior year of high school, tried to get my grandmother talking about her garden, even attempted to engage me in discussion about my work. But Tyler and Emma kept steering everything back to money, success, and material things. Tyler bragged about a deal he was working on that was sure to make him rich, though he was vague on the details. Emma talked about her boutique like it was the next Chanel, conveniently leaving out the part where she'd borrowed money from everyone in the family to keep it afloat. The food arrived in waves, course after course of elaborate dishes that I watched them consume with the kind of theatrical appreciation that suggested they were performing rather than genuinely enjoying the meal. Tyler made sure to order another bottle of champagne when the first 2 were empty, and Emma insisted on trying 3 different desserts because she simply couldn't decide. The waiter, a consummate professional, never showed any sign of judgment, but I caught him glancing at me occasionally with what looked like sympathy. Throughout it all, I remained calm, nursing my coffee and later a glass of water, making polite conversation when directly addressed, but otherwise observing this family dynamic with the kind of clarity that only comes from distance. These people who had made me feel small for so many years suddenly seemed small themselves, petty and grasping, and ultimately rather sad. Their entire evening revolved around trying to stick me with a bill they couldn't afford, and they thought they were being clever about it. When the plates were finally cleared and the dessert remnants pushed aside, the waiter arrived with the check. The table fell silent as he approached, and with the practiced precision of someone who had dealt with large parties before, he placed it directly in front of me. I didn't react immediately, just continued my conversation with Amy about her college applications, but I could feel everyone watching, waiting. The check sat there like a ticking bomb for a full minute before Tyler finally broke. "So, Sarah," he said, his voice casual but his eyes sharp. "You've got this, right? I mean, it's nothing to you." I picked up the check and looked at it with genuine interest. $3,247. They'd really gone all out. I set it back down and looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. "You know," I said conversationally, "I find it interesting how family dynamics work. The assumptions we make about each other, the roles we assign without ever really discussing them." Emma shifted uncomfortably. "What are you talking about?" "Just pay the bill so we can go." But I wasn't done. Growing up, I was assigned the role of the weird one, the outsider, the one who didn't quite fit. And I accepted it because I didn't know any better. Then when I became successful, you all assigned me a new role, the family ATM, the one who pays for everything because she can afford it. My aunt huffed. "Don't be dramatic, Sarah. We're family. Family helps each other out." "Do they?" I asked, because I don't remember anyone helping me when I was working 3 jobs to get through college. I don't remember any investment in my company when I was begging banks for loans. I don't remember a single one of you even asking how I was doing during those years when I was barely surviving. The silence was deafening. My mother looked down at her hands, and I felt a pang of guilt for making her uncomfortable, but this needed to be said. Tyler's face was getting red. "That's different. You made it on your own. Good for you. But now you have more than you need, and we're struggling. It's only fair that you help out." "Fair?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "What's fair about expecting me to pay for your excess? What's fair about treating me like I don't belong at the family table, but expecting me to foot the bill for it?" "Sarah, please," my mother said softly. "Let's not make a scene." "I'm not making a scene, Mom. I'm having an honest conversation with my family for the first time in years." I picked up the check again. "This is more than some people make in a month. You all ordered without any consideration for the cost because you assumed I would pay. That's not family helping family. That's exploitation." Tyler slammed his hand on the table. "Exploitation? Are you kidding me? We're your family. Being related by blood doesn't give you the right to my bank account, Tyler." I stood up, calm and collected. "I'm done being the family piggy bank. You want to eat at expensive restaurants? You want to order champagne and lobster? That's fine, but you'll pay for it yourselves." The waiter had been hovering nearby, clearly aware of the tension, and I caught his eye. "Separate checks, please," I said clearly. "I'll be paying for my coffee." The explosion was immediate. Tyler jumped up, his chair scraping against the floor. "You can't be serious." Emma's voice was shrill. "Sarah, don't be ridiculous." My uncle was blustering about family loyalty and knowing my place. My aunt was making passive-aggressive comments about people who forgot where they came from. But I wasn't listening anymore. I pulled out a $20 bill, more than enough for my coffee, and placed it on the table. "Sarah, wait," my mother said, standing up. Her face was distressed, torn between her desire for family harmony and her understanding of my position. "Please, let's talk about this." I hugged her gently. "We can talk later, Mom. Just the two of us. But I'm done with this dynamic. I love you, but I can't keep enabling this behavior." "Enabling?" Tyler spat. "You think you're so much better than us, don't you? Just because you have money now?" "No, Tyler," I said, turning to face him one last time. "I don't think I'm better than you. I think I'm worth more than being your personal bank account. There's a difference." I walked out of that private dining room with my head held high, leaving behind the chaos of raised voices and panic about the bill. The main restaurant was quiet. elegant diners enjoying their meals without drama, and I paused for a moment to appreciate the peace. My phone started buzzing before I even reached the parking lot, but I didn't answer. I knew what they wanted, and I was done giving it to them. The cool October air felt refreshing after the stifling atmosphere inside. I sat in my car for a moment, not starting the engine, just breathing. I felt strange, not upset, not angry, but oddly liberated. For 34 years, I'd been playing a role in my family's dysfunction, and I'd finally decided to rewrite the script. My phone continued to buzz with calls and texts, and I finally looked at them. Missed calls from Tyler, Emma, my aunt, even a few from numbers I didn't recognize. The texts ranged from angry to pleading to manipulative. Emma's was typical. "This is so embarrassing. How could you do this to us? We're your family." My uncle had sent, "Very disappointed in your behavior tonight. This is not how family treats each other." But it was Tyler's that really stood out. "You think you're teaching us a lesson? You're just showing everyone what a selfish bitch you've become. Enjoy being alone with your money." I deleted them all without responding. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been said. They'd made their choices, and I'd made mine. The only text I kept was from my mother. "I understand, sweetheart. I'm sorry. Let's have lunch tomorrow. Just us." The drive home was peaceful. I lived in a beautiful townhouse in Cherry Creek now, a far cry from the studio apartment of my struggling years. As I walked through my front door, I was greeted by the life I'd built for myself, a home filled with art I loved, books that had shaped me, and the comfortable silence of a space that was entirely mine. No mockery, no judgment, no expectations except the ones I set for myself. I poured myself a glass of wine and settled into my favorite chair, finally allowing myself to process what had just happened. The funny thing was, I didn't feel guilty. For years, I'd worried that standing up to my family would leave me feeling terrible, selfish, alone. But instead, I felt free. Free from the obligation to fix everyone else's problems. Free from the need to buy their approval. Free from the role they'd assigned me without my consent. The calls continued throughout the evening, but I let them go to voicemail. Round 10 o'clock, I finally listened to one from Emma, her voice a mixture of panic and anger. "Sarah, this is insane. The bill is over $3,000. None of us can afford this. Tyler's credit card got declined. You need to come back and fix this. This is your fault, my fault, because I'd refused to be used, because I'd finally said no." It was almost laughable if it wasn't so sad. They'd created this situation entirely on their own, ordering without restraint, assuming I'd cover their excess, and now they wanted me to feel guilty for their predicament. I thought about calling back, maybe offering to pay for my mother's meal at least, but I knew that would defeat the purpose. This wasn't really about the money. I could afford the $3,000 without blinking. This was about patterns and expectations and the toxic dynamics that had defined our family for too long. If I caved now, nothing would change. They'd learn that with enough pressure, enough guilt, I'd always give in. The next morning, I met my mother for lunch at a quiet cafe near her house. She looked tired, older somehow than she had just the night before. We sat in silence for a moment before she reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "I've always known how they treated you wasn't right. I should have stood up for you more when you were young. I should have said something last night." I squeezed her hand. "You were trying to keep the peace." "I understand that." She shook her head. "Keeping the peace came at your expense, and that wasn't fair. When they placed you away from the table last night, I should have moved to sit with you. I should have She admitted, "When that I paid for." We began away from the toxic dynamics of the larger family. She was funnier, more insightful, more herself. The fallout from the restaurant incident continued for weeks. I received angry emails, manipulative texts, even a formal letter from my uncle threatening legal action if I didn't reimburse them for the emotional distress I'd caused. I forwarded that one to my lawyer friend, who laughed and said it was the most ridiculous thing she'd ever seen. Apparently, refusing to pay for someone else's dinner wasn't grounds for a lawsuit, no matter how embarrassing the situation had been. Tyler and Emma tried different tactics as time went on. When anger didn't work, they switched to guilt. Emma sent me a long message about how the stress from that night had affected her health, how she couldn't sleep thinking about how her own cousin had humiliated her. Tyler wrote about family traditions and how I was destroying our family's bond. When guilt didn't work, they tried bargaining. They'd forgive me for the restaurant incident if I'd just helped them out with some financial difficulties they were facing. I didn't respond to any of it. The silence, I found, was more powerful than any words I could say. It forced them to confront the reality that I was no longer playing by their rules, no longer available to be their safety net. Some of the extended family took sides, of course. Some supported them, saying I'd gone too far, that family should always come first. Others, surprisingly, reached out to say they understood, that they'd noticed the dynamics too, but hadn't known how to address them. My cousin Amy, the high schooler, sent me a message that touched me deeply. I saw what they did to you at dinner, and it wasn't right. I'm glad you stood up for yourself. It made me think about how I let people treat me too. Thank you for showing me it's okay to say no. About 2 months after the incident, I received an unexpected call from Emma. Her voice was different, subdued and hesitant. Sarah, can we talk? Actually talk, not fight? I agreed to meet her for coffee, curious about this change in tone. She showed up looking exhausted, her usual perfect appearance somewhat disheveled. We sat across from each other in awkward silence before she finally spoke. I've been thinking a lot about what you said that night. About roles and expectations, and I realized you were right. We did treat you badly growing up, and we did expect you to pay for things just because you could. It wasn't fair. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation, but she seemed sincere. What changed your mind? She laughed bitterly. The boutique is failing, has been for months. And when I couldn't get money from you anymore, I had to actually look at why. I've been living beyond my means for years, expecting other people to bail me out. First my parents, then you. I never learned to stand on my own feet. We talked for an hour, and while I wasn't ready to fully trust her transformation, I appreciated her honesty. She wasn't asking for money or help, just understanding. When we parted, she said something that stayed with me. You know, I was always jealous of you. Not of your success, but of your independence. You never needed anyone's approval the way I did. Tyler, on the other hand, doubled down on his resentment. The family grapevine informed me that he'd told everyone I was dead to him, that I'd chosen money over family. He'd retold the restaurant story so many times with so many embellishments that in his version, I had practically thrown champagne in their faces while laughing maniacally. It would have been funny if it wasn't so sad. A year passed, and the family dynamics shifted and settled into new patterns. I maintained my relationship with my mother and slowly built connections with the family members who were interested in real relationships rather than transactions. Amy started college and would occasionally text me for advice. Even my grandmother, who had initially been confused by the whole situation, began inviting me for tea. Just the two of us. The second Christmas after the restaurant incident, my mother convinced me to attend the family gathering. I was hesitant, but she assured me things had changed. And in many ways, they had. The event was held at my aunt's house instead of an expensive venue. It was potluck style, with everyone contributing something. There was still tension. Tyler pointedly ignored me, and my uncle made a few passive-aggressive comments. But overall, it was manageable. What struck me most was how different the energy was. Without the expectation that I would foot the bill for everything, people had to be more mindful of their choices. The gifts were modest, the meal was simple but heartfelt, and there was less performance and more genuine interaction. It wasn't perfect. We were still a complicated family with a lot of history, but it was better. Emma pulled me aside during the party. She looked good, healthier and more grounded than I'd seen her in years. I closed the boutique, she told me. Got a regular job. It's not glamorous, but it's steady, and I'm learning a lot. I wanted to thank you, actually, for forcing me to face reality. I was surprised. Most people don't thank someone for refusing to enable them. She smiled ruefully. It took me a while to see it that way. But you were right. I was using you, and it wasn't fair. I'm sorry for all of it. The teasing when we were kids, the expectations when we were adults. You deserved better from your family. It was a start. Not a magical reconciliation, but a start. Tyler never came around, and that was okay. Some relationships can't be repaired, and forcing them only causes more damage. But the family members who were willing to see me as a person rather than a resource became part of my life in a healthier way. 3 years after the restaurant incident, I was having dinner with my mother when she brought it up again. Do you ever regret how that night went? She asked. Sometimes I wonder if there was a gentler way to handle it. I thought about it for a moment. Maybe there was, I said finally. but I don't think a gentle approach would have worked. They needed a shock to the system. And honestly, I needed to do it for myself. I needed to prove that I could stand up for myself, that my success hadn't come at the cost of my self-respect. She nodded, understanding. You know what the real change was? It wasn't just about the money. After that night, the whole family had to look at how we treated each other. Some rose to the challenge and some didn't, but at least we were being honest about it. She was right. The restaurant incident had been a catalyst, forcing everyone to examine their roles in our family dysfunction. It had been painful and messy and probably more dramatic than necessary, but it had also been necessary. Sometimes you have to break something completely before you can rebuild it into something better. Looking back now, I can see that night at Chez Laurent as a turning point not just in my family relationships, but in how I saw myself. For so long, I had accepted the roles others assigned to me: the weird kid, the outsider, the family ATM. That night, I decided to write my own role, and it was the most liberating thing I'd ever done. The truth is, we teach people how to treat us. By accepting disrespect, we enable it. By funding others' excess, we encourage it. By staying silent when we should speak up, we perpetuate cycles that damage everyone involved. It took me 34 years to learn that lesson, but once I did, everything changed. I still run my company, still work hard, still value success, but now I also value relationships built on mutual respect rather than exploitation. I've learned that true family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about the people who see you for who you are and love you not for what you can provide, but for your inherent worth as a person. The family members who understood that became closer to me than ever. The ones who didn't drifted away, and that's okay. Not every relationship is meant to last forever, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let go of dynamics that no longer serve anyone involved. I sometimes think about what would have happened if I'd just paid that bill, if I'd continued the pattern of enabling and being used. I probably would have saved myself some drama in the short term, but the long-term cost would have been much higher. Every time I gave in, I would have been reinforcing the message that my worth was tied to my wallet, that their approval was something I needed to purchase rather than earn through mutual respect. My mother and I talk about it sometimes. How different our family gatherings are now. They're smaller, quieter, but also more genuine. The people who show up are there because they want to be, not because they're expecting something. The conversations are real rather than performed. It's not the big, boisterous family experience that some people have, but it's ours and it's honest. Emma has become a surprising ally in this new family dynamic. Her journey to financial independence has been challenging but transformative. She's working in marketing now, using the skills she developed with her boutique in a more stable environment. We meet for lunch occasionally, and our conversations are nothing like they used to be. Instead of her asking for money or me deflecting requests, we talk about our careers, our challenges, our growth. It's the relationship I never thought we'd have, built on mutual respect rather than obligation. Me, now in her junior year of college, often texts me for advice. She's studying business, inspired, she says, by watching me build my companies. But more than that, she's learned to set boundaries in her own relationships, to value herself beyond what she can do for others. She told me once that watching that dinner unfold was one of the most important lessons of her teenage years, that you can love people and still refuse to be mistreated by them. Tyler remains distant, still clinging to his version of events where I'm the villain who destroyed the family. I hear updates through the grapevine. He's still chasing get-rich-quick schemes, still blaming others for his failures, still waiting for someone to rescue him from his own choices. It makes me sad, but not guilty. Some people have to learn their lessons the hard way, and some never learn them at all. The restaurant itself, Chez Laurent, closed down about 2 years after our incident. I drove by when I heard, looking at the empty windows with a strange mix of emotions. That place had been the setting for one of the most pivotal moments of my life, the stage where I'd finally performed the role I'd written for myself instead of the one assigned to me. In a way, I was grateful to it for providing such a dramatic backdrop for my Declaration of Independence. These days, when my family gathers, we usually meet at someone's home or at modest restaurants where everyone can comfortably pay their own way. The conversations flow more naturally when no one is performing for an audience or angling for a benefactor. We've learned to celebrate each other's successes without expecting to profit from them, to support each other through challenges without enabling destructive patterns. I've also learned to recognize similar dynamics in other areas of my life. business associates who only called when they needed something, friends who disappeared when I stopped picking up every check, romantic interests who were more interested in my success than in me as a person. The lesson I learned that night at Chez Laurent extended far beyond family. It was about recognizing my own worth and refusing to let others define it for me. Sometimes I receive messages from people who've heard some version of the story, usually from family members. They're often from others dealing with similar situations, asking for advice on how to handle family members who see them as ATMs rather than people. I always tell them the same thing. The cost of maintaining these dynamics is higher than any restaurant bill. Your self-respect, your genuine relationships, your ability to trust. These things are priceless, and protecting them sometimes requires difficult decisions. The journey from that night to now hasn't always been smooth. There were moments of doubt, times when the guilt almost overwhelmed me, occasions when I wondered if I'd been too harsh. But each time I wavered, I reminded myself of how it felt to be excluded from the family table while being expected to pay for the meal. That image became my touchstone, my reminder of why boundaries matter. Now, at 37, I can look back on that 21-year-old girl reading alone while her cousins partied and feel proud of how far she's come. Not just in terms of success or money, but in terms of self-worth and the courage to demand respect. That girl needed someone to stand up for her, and eventually she became that someone herself. My company continues to thrive, and I've been able to use my success to make a real difference in the world. I fund scholarships for young women in STEM, mentor entrepreneurs from underprivileged backgrounds, and support causes that matter to me. This is what success means to me now. Not just personal achievement, but the ability to lift others up. The difference is that I do it on my terms, choosing to help rather than being manipulated into it. The family dynamics continue to evolve. Last month, my grandmother passed away peacefully at 91, and the funeral brought everyone together in a way we hadn't been in years. Even Tyler and I managed a civil conversation, though we'll probably never be close again. Death has a way of putting petty grievances in perspective, and for a moment we were just family, grieving together. At the reception after the funeral, held at my aunt's house with everyone contributing food potluck style, I found myself standing with my mother, looking around at the gathered family. "It's different now, isn't it?" she said softly. It was. The toxic dynamics hadn't completely disappeared. Some patterns are too deeply ingrained to ever fully vanish. But they'd been weakened, challenged, and in many cases replaced with healthier interactions. The family members who had learned and grown from that night at Chez Laurent had become closer, while those who hadn't had naturally drifted to the periphery. As I write this story, I'm preparing for my wedding. I'm marrying a wonderful man who understands and respects my journey, who's never once suggested I should reconcile with Tyler, or that family harmony is more important than self-respect. The guest list includes my mother, Amy, Emma, and the family members who've shown they value me as a person. It's smaller than some might expect, but it's filled with people who genuinely care about celebrating with us rather than seeing what they can get from us. Emma is actually one of my bridesmaids, something that would have seemed impossible 5 years ago. She earned that place not through blood or obligation, but through the genuine friendship we've built on the ashes of our old dynamic. She jokes sometimes that I did her the biggest favor of her life by refusing to enable her anymore, forcing her to grow up and take responsibility for herself. The wedding will be beautiful but modest, a reflection of our values rather than a performance of wealth. Everyone invited knows they're responsible for their own expenses, and no one expects otherwise. It's a far cry from the dynamics that led to that night at Chez Laurent. And I'm grateful for the growth that made this possible. Looking back, I realized that the $3,247 bill was actually a bargain. For that price, I purchased my freedom from toxic family dynamics, learned to value myself properly, and set in motion changes that improved not just my life, but the lives of family members willing to grow. Not all of them were, and that's okay. You can't save people from themselves, and trying to do so often just enables their destructive patterns. The lessons from that night have served me well in all areas of life. In business, I've learned to recognize and avoid partnerships that echo those old family dynamics. In friendships, I seek out relationships based on mutual respect and genuine connection. In romance, I found someone who loved me before he knew about my success, and who's never once made me feel like a wallet rather than a person. Sometimes, when I'm having dinner with my chosen family, the mix of blood relatives and found family who've proven they value me for who I am, I think about that girl sitting at the corner of the table, drinking coffee while her family tried to humiliate her into submission. I want to tell her that it gets better. that standing up for herself that night will lead to a life filled with genuine love and respect. But she already knows. Somewhere deep inside, that girl knew her worth even when everyone around her was trying to convince her otherwise. She knew that success meant nothing if it came at the cost of self-respect, that family isn't defined by blood but by behavior, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable dysfunction. That night at Chez Laurent, I didn't just refuse to pay a bill. I refused to pay the price of admission to a toxic family dynamic. I refused to purchase approval that should have been freely given. I refused to accept that my worth was measured in dollars rather than dignity. And in doing so, I discovered that the real price of self-respect is priceless. It costs everything and nothing at all. The bill they tried to stick me with that night was $3,247. The lesson I learned was worth infinitely more. And unlike that overpriced meal at a pretentious restaurant, it's a value that appreciates over time, paying dividends in self-worth, genuine relationships, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you can stand up for yourself when it matters most. To anyone reading this who sees themselves in my story, who's sitting at their own version of that corner table while family members try to use them, I want you to know, you deserve better. Your worth isn't measured by what you can provide for others, but by your inherent value as a person. It's okay to say no. It's okay to refuse to be used. It's okay to demand respect, even especially from family. The path might be difficult, and you might lose some relationships along the way. But the relationships you lose were likely transactional rather than genuine, based on what you could provide rather than who you are. And in their place, you'll find the space to build connections that nourish rather than drain you, that celebrate your success without trying to exploit it, that see you as a whole person rather than a resource to be mined. That's the real lesson from that night at Chez Laurent. Not that family doesn't matter, but that real family, the kind worth having, respects you enough not to use you. They seat you at the table because you belong there, not adjacent to it until the bill comes. They celebrate your success without feeling entitled to it. They love you for who you are, not for what you can do for them. And sometimes, just sometimes, teaching that lesson requires letting them pick up their own check, no matter how much they ordered or how loud they complain. Because at the end of the day, we all have to pay our own way in life, and the sooner we learn that, the better off we'll be. That night, my family learned it the hard way. But they learned it, and for those willing to grow from the experience, we all emerged stronger and more honest than before. The girl drinking coffee at the corner of that table has grown into a woman who sits confidently at any table she chooses, knowing her worth isn't determined by others' opinions or expectations. She pays her own way and expects others to do the same. She gives from love, not obligation, and she never, ever lets anyone make her feel like she doesn't belong. That's worth more than any dinner bill. That's worth everything.